We are going to get started. This is the committee meeting for the Neighborhood Preservation Committee to go over some things with the Community Ambassador program under MBD. All right, with the Center for Justice Innovation? Correct. Okay, all right. Okay, so I don't want to go into like all of what the center is about, just more or less the program and its start and how it's doing to date, and then we'll throw in some so if you could just give a little background, Michelle, about how the program came to be.
Sure. Michelle Spansky, Deputy Commissioner of Neighborhood Development. I'm joined here by Leah Russell with the Center for Justice Innovation and...
oh, I'm sorry, Michelle, 1 second.
Yeah.
I do apologize. I have with me Counselor Monto and Pro Temp Hogan, and myself, Counselor Jones-Rouser.
As well as Kelly Gonzalez from the Center for Justice Innovation. So just to give a little bit of an overview of kind of how the program came to be, this is something that we have been working on in partnership with the Center for Justice Innovation, dating all the way back to 2019, actually. So the city is one of several different programs that we've received support from the New York Attorney General's office over the past several years to deal with different challenges that kind of arose out of the housing market crash and some settlement funds that the AG's office won against some of the larger mortgage lenders. The AG's office was extremely generous around dedicating additional pools of funding to help mitigate the impacts of the housing market crash. One of those things being the role that code enforcement has in communities, another one of those things at different points in time also involving the land bank, vacant and zombie properties. But this partnership was specific to some funds that were made available specific to code enforcement. And particularly focused on helping to ensure that code enforcement processes within municipalities were running in a way that was inclusive and equitable and efficient, and also kind of cognizant of different types of community needs. So there was a couple phases to this funding. The first one being a community engagement phase where each of the municipalities that participated in New York State, Syracuse was one of about 10 to 12 different municipalities that was a part of this Cities Rise program, as it was called, where the initial phase was focused on just doing engagement and making sure that we were doing a good job of thoroughly reaching different audiences and different populations within the city residents that were disproportionately affected by housing challenges. So in our case, we were particularly focused on low-income renters, Black and Latino residents, people with disabilities, seniors, I think was the main kind of target populations that we were looking at for that outreach. So we partnered with the Center for Justice Innovation to conduct a series of kitchen table talks. We felt that it was really important that in the scope of doing that initial outreach, that it was something that was being convened in order for us to really kind of properly meet residents in the way that we felt would be most effective. We wanted to make sure that we weren't just kind of replicating kind of the typical model of community engagement that I think oftentimes we fall back on, which is asking people to show up to meetings when they have a lot of other things going on that they could be doing, and just making sure that we're kind of recognizing the expertise that people have and meeting people where they're at in the process of doing that. CJI had a fantastic model for doing that that was built off of some work that was initially started by the Gifford Foundation many years ago. And we felt that it was a good model that would fit well. Really what we were working with them on was a couple resident coordinators that would help find residents to host kitchen table talks in their homes. The hosts of the kitchen table talks would line up 8 or 10 people to join, and then we would just have a conversation, share a meal, and talk about kind of what people were seeing in regards to their housing conditions. We reached a total, in a span of about 4 months, we had 60 different conversations and reached about 700 residents across that span in the summer of 2019. And the main themes that we really saw that emerged from that was a lot of things that aren't necessarily shocking for people that are doing this work, but I think really underscored the urgency and necessity of us thinking about some new approaches and kind of formalizing some of those approaches as we look to address those issues moving forward. So really kind of the core themes within that work were the extent to which substandard housing issues were causing major impacts for residents and impacting not only their immediate health, but also kind of their mental health and well-being. Just the challenges that housing instability and dealing with that causes for families. We found a lot of lacking awareness and understanding of kind of the rights and responsibilities and processes that come along with interfacing with code enforcement. So what are the rights and responsibilities of my landlord, but also what are my rights and responsibilities as a tenant? How do I work to interface with all those systems? We found a lot of challenges just with poor relationships kind of in what I like to call the triangle of code enforcement stakeholders, so residents, code enforcement in the city, and property owners themselves, so a lot of mistrust in all directions of that diagram there. And we also found a lot of residents that were really interested in being more involved in kind of neighborhood beautification within their neighborhoods. And I think with all of that, what we found once we finished that initial phase, the way that the first phase was designed to do the engagement was it was designed to be kind of a precursor that we could then use to go formulate a larger ask for the grant funds to kind of implement a solution that helped address some of those needs. And I think what we found as we did a lot of that outreach was that it underscored the extent to which a lot of residents have a lot of challenges that they're experiencing that go far beyond the scope of what code enforcement is trained to do and is within their role. Code enforcement is a really, really important part of the puzzle, and they need to be at the table. But also just the reality of a lot of people don't trust the city, and to call the city into your property, there's any number of reasons why a resident might be reluctant to do that. Fear of retaliation, just if you're an immigrant to this country and don't come from somewhere where you're have great experiences with the government, if you're from this country and you have that experience, that any number of things that we felt like there needed to be an additional tool that we added to the toolbox to help kind of residents with that systems navigation, make sure that people kind of understand what code enforcement is and what it isn't, but also make sure that we're allowing people some additional tools where we can help them learn to kind of advocate on behalf of themselves and learn to be more proactive about doing it in the future and just understand kind of here's the systems that exist that I can work through, but do it in a way where it's paired with some additional resources and support to help kind of talk people through it. We felt that that CJI was really well positioned at the point that we got that grant. We were awarded subsequently then $1 million from the AG's office that ran through Enterprise Community Partners. Those funds were awarded in February of 2020, right before the start of the pandemic. We felt that CJI was a fantastic partner for us to be able to kind of continue that work on as we were moving forward, not just because of the collaboration that we had in place as a result of doing the kitchen table talks, but also just some of their background as an organization and the role that they have historically been involved here locally in the last several years in doing different types of alternative restorative justice in relationship with the local court system. So there's some background that you have there on the handouts that I provided you, but I think our thinking at the time and has still been is that they were very uniquely positioned, not just for the experience and skills that they have with doing really effective resident engagement and outreach, but also their unique position within the local court system and the opportunity that that could present for us to consider how we might expand different alternative models on the enforcement related to housing. And as we have kind of continued out this partnership, I mentioned we got the $1 million grant back in 2020 through the Cities Rise program. Those funds ran us through the summer of 2022, at which point the council authorized us to use ARPA funds, $800,000 to renew that contract for another 2 years to continue the work of that program. And then, which led us to kind of why we're here before you all today. So the council authorized back with the general budget this spring, $200,000 for the continuation of that program. Those funds were split roughly 50% with what we would have needed to continue resourcing the Community Ambassador Program and the FEC at both 50% of their respective values. So The item that came before you most recently was basically a request that we would take the $200,000 that was authorized for the continuation of the Community Ambassador Program within the 24-25 fiscal year operating budget, and then pair that with a little bit of remaining ARPA funds that we have from some other housing-related projects that from a timing standpoint we're finding is not going to be the best fit, so that we could kind of continue the scope of services to remain it whole as it has been running for the last 2 years. There's some information that I handed out just in terms of kind of the types of cases that the ambassadors have been focusing on. I think a couple things that are just notable to point out, you'll notice in all of the years that the program has been operational, about 50 to 60% of the caseload has been focused on cases that are initiated as a part of rental registry outreach. So in instances in which a property owner may not consent to have their property inspected if it's a 1 or 2 family property, we have leveraged the role of the community ambassadors to do some door-to-door outreach to those tenants, basically just kind of explain what the rental registry is, ask them if they have any challenges that they're having within their property that they haven't been able to get addressed with the landlord, and if the answer is yes and they're willing to have code enforcement come out, we've been able to kind of leverage that as a tool to be able to get in some of those properties.
Which one of these are, just describe these, because I don't know what CARR.
Yeah, rental registry non-consent. So that was what I wanted to call out specifically there.
Okay, so if you can just tell me what
Yep.
all 4 of these
Yep.
are for.
Rental registry non-consent has been kind of the largest caseload that we have there. Typically, when those cases happen, and a lot of...
No, I'm saying, can you just tell me what each color means?
Yep, sure. Other referral assistance, so those are situations where it's mostly, there's other housing needs or could just be other kind of service-related needs that somebody might have. Say they're interested in the Financial Empowerment Center or something like that. They'll make those connections to the relative service providers. Codes case management is another one where that's really just kind of refers to interfacing that is happening outside the scope of something that the city presented as an initial case. So oftentimes those are cases where the community ambassadors are the ones making the first touch points. One thing I do just want to underscore, though, with the rental registry non-consents is that even though that's kind of maybe the initial entry point with those, the ambassadors are very much handling the case follow-up on those in the same way that they would be if it was a case that they initiated themselves. So they're staying involved with the case, making sure that, as the process is working through with code enforcement, they're staying in touch with the tenants. So they're being presented as anything else. It's just a question.
I have a question after you get done.
So we might want to just go back. So how do they get to the individuals for rental registry non-consent?
So those are referred directly by the Department of Code Enforcement. So
code enforcement, because someone isn't consenting to be on a registry, then code enforcement sends this team to the house to...
They send a referral, and an ambassador will go out and do a door knock. They'll leave some literature kind of explaining, here's what the program is. If you're having any housing challenges, you can give us a call. In many instances, sometimes tenants don't follow up, and at that point, after 3 attempts, then we'll close the case. But it's at least kind of a means of adding an additional layer there of making sure that residents know and understand kind of, here's what this process is. If you're having challenges, understanding that the role of the rental registry is to make sure that we're ensuring that there's a minimum level of quality and safety within a rental property. We found that it's been an effective tool, and that having the ambassadors in particular go out and be the ones that are initiating that conversation, understanding that they're able to move in a way that's a little bit different than code enforcement is knocking on the door with a badge.
So with that said, if I may ask, so you got another question, Patricia?
Go.
You okay? With that saying, I've worked with Leah personally outside, knocking on doors. Why haven't we thought about using them with the back taxes to knock on the doors? Because a lot of them are related, community, they know the community, so helping them fill out the paperwork, they would be good with that part of like somebody out in the community, knocking on the doors, helping them complete the paperwork, somebody that knows the community.
Yeah. Kimon can jump in here a little bit if there's anything else that she feels like I need to add, but I think there are certain instances in which we do refer them. I think some of it also just comes down to overall caseload and case scope. As we've been finding now that we've been doing this program for a couple years, the level of time that some of these cases take, and just like residents oftentimes need a lot of coaching. And so I think we have been reluctant, understanding that that's a role that MBD has historically done within our office. While we've leveraged it in certain situations where we feel like it's been appropriate, we also feel like in order to ensure that resourcing is sufficient, that would require us, I think, probably to add additional resources into what's just within this particular
I hear
scope.
what you're saying, but I sort of disagree because they're ambassadors. Ambassadors are the people that are in a community that have relationships that can communicate with people. So when the city comes and talks, it's a whole different ballgame. When the ambassador comes, because I'm coming in a different way, I understand. I have a relationship. I've already been here with you. I get it. So when you utilizing them for the housing piece, especially with the back taxes, is a miss on us because they really could be a help. I honestly think that. I think it would be less confusion.
Yeah, and
to
that's
them.
something that we're super happy to build into kind of the scope of work and what we would be putting forward with them, so.
If I could just add to that for just a minute, Councilor. So Michael Collins, Commissioner for Neighborhood and Business Development. So when we take a look at what we've asked them to do and who we've asked them to engage with, so the skill set absolutely is there. It is not what we've been typically contracting with them to do, and it's a different population. When you think about the fact that so much of what we've been trying to do has been related to the tenant and then educating the landlord. A lot of times when we're dealing with people that are back taxes, especially those that we're trying to save, those are often the owner occupied. So it's completely outside the scope. So absolutely, we can look at that. We would have to negotiate it differently within the contract.
But, so let me ask you a question. You guys have 4, from what I understood, things could have changed, but you have one in each sector of the city, right? North, south, east, west. And their primary relationship is to learn about that community, what's going on in that community, and get to know that community, right? So to me, it just seems like it's just perfect to be a part of that because I guarantee they're working with families that they don't even realize that we're in those situations, but we haven't tapped into it, you know? And now we're dealing with like now rental, which, you know, could be preventive because they already built relationships.
Sure. Yeah. No, I certainly appreciate that. And as I mentioned, I think that's something that we could look to figure out a way that we could make that work. I don't think that's a stretch.
Just to speak, you said that they have 3 or 4?
There's 4 total. So there was just a recent staff transition. So there will be another position that's getting added in. But
Can you take me back through the dollars for a minute? Sorry, Corey, did I jump over you?
I was going to go back to where Patrona was before she was there, but you can go ahead. We'll get to me.
Thank you, Counselor. So I see that there's 965 in 2020 from the AG, and then 800 in 2022. And then this year, 200,000. So how much is left from the 800 ARPA that we're adding to the 200?
so this year there's 400,000 that we're asking for. So basically there was 200,000 already authorized within the city general fund. We're matching that with another 200,000 to be able to keep it so that it's kind of prorated at the same rate that it was for the previous 2 years under the $800,000 ARPA contract.
Okay.
So the contract that was in place from August of 2022 through tomorrow, that contract is expired as of tomorrow. So
it's
those
200
they
from
have-
ARPA and then 200 from the general fund?
Correct.
Is that, okay.
Yes. So
And
that and what that covers then is effectively maintaining the same level of services that we have been getting for the last 2 years under ARPA.
Okay. So next year, we're looking at no ARPA funding, so we'll be looking at 400 from the, right, for sustainability? Okay.
Correct. And I think that it's important to point out that we've been pretty intentional about how we've been kind of tracking the impact with this, understanding that it was initiated as a pilot program, and there's often times we're doing that with different grant funds. I think as we have moved forward with the program, we found that there's a lot of value that it's bringing and the way in which it's supplementing city services, and that's part of the reason why we're asking that it be kind of maintained within the general fund budget. That's why we put it forward this year. I think in addition to just the work that we mentioned around the rental registry outreach, there's been any number of other different situations in which the ambassadors have been really instrumental in helping to support work that's complementary to the mission of neighborhood and business development. A couple examples of that being when we've had major problem property issues like Parkside Commons, the Skyline, they're able to go out and do a lot of door knocking, reach different residents that may have been reluctant to have properties inspected, where we're able to actually go into more interior units, get more violations cited, and then in turn able to hold property owners more accountable to getting those violations corrected.
And I think that's what Councilor Caldwell was kind of getting to. So when the ambassadors
Yeah.
are going out to these properties, are we in situations where they're referring people to other agencies,
Correct,
social
yes.
service? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And so that's kind of not, oftentimes in a case, even if the origin of the case is a rental registry outreach, there's any number of other different referrals that they might still be making to other related services. It's just a matter of how we kind of categorize the case of what was the start reason. It doesn't mean that there wasn't other referrals that were being made.
But I think even to speak to that, and I'll come back to you, Corey.
It all
sorry.
ties together.
To
Don't
even
worry.
speak to
We're
that,
good.
as far as like some of the non-compliant rental registry individuals, they may also be some of the owners of tax delinquent properties.
Right.
So you're doing outreach to the tenants. That's just another leg to say, we're over here speaking to them, and we want to make sure that you understand that this is what's happening here, and you're not, following up through the registry, nor are you doing your financial due diligence. So I think that is something that can definitely be built in to this program. Come on.
Oh, so Kimon Jordan, Director of Housing and Neighborhood Planning. I would just add, to what my colleagues have said, whenever there is overlap, we do definitely leverage the community ambassador. So if there is a non-compliant rental registry case where the property is tax delinquent, we do additional outreach. So there's definitely overlap. We're checking the systems to make sure that properties aren't tax delinquent as well.
Overlap to the owner or to the tenants? Okay.
So the people I'm sorry, Corey. So the people that are working for you, come on, that goes to the doors, the knock on the doors, are also working with this group to say, hey, do you know the community, the community?
Yes, correct.
So they're working with the tax delinquent ones, we're using both organizations to make it happen, right?
So only when there is a non-rental registry case where the property is tax delinquent. So we're not contracted with the community ambassadors to do foreclosure outreach, but when there are specific cases where there is overlap, we support each other.
So even if there was, for instance, if there was somebody that was registered, we knew who they were, but they didn't comply, right? Because you didn't get in touch with them, we never used the ambassadors. Like I know Leah's heavy on the west side, right? She can go over there and tell you, almost say, we never say, hey, we know who it is, but we're not getting an answer. Leah, can you go over there and speak to that family and make sure, are we using them and the resources that to have? Because it's two sides here. We got the rental registry, the people that are renting, and we also got the homeowners who are in the situations, and sometimes they're really our stories, right? I've been to, one that you guys just helped. It was a real big story behind it. So are we using the ambassadors that know their neighborhoods to say, hey, could you see what's going on with that? You know what I mean? Because we know who it is, but we're sending letters and we don't get any response. Do you know this family? You know what's going on? Do we ever use them in that way? That's what I was trying to say.
So I think in some cases we do, but since they're not specifically contracted for that work, we don't prioritize tax delinquent properties or having them support outreach for tax delinquent properties.
So they're only really for rental registry
And outreach.
and tenant outreach, but nothing for landlord outreach, the ones, people. So only for tenant outreach, nothing else?
So the language that is in the scope is geared pretty heavily towards substandard housing conditions. To Kimon's point, there's certain instances in which we have made referrals because we know special circumstances, we know that they do have those connections, and so that we've leveraged them to do that. In terms of kind of the total amount of caseload and resources, we have one full FTE that is spending roughly probably 30 of 40 hours a week just dedicated to rental registry related outreach. So in terms of our ability to make sure that we are properly resourcing, understanding that both of these things are very important in order to make sure that we're properly resourcing that, I think what we have said as far as kind of specifically carving it out as a parameter of their scope, we thus far to date have not done that. We're certainly happy to have a conversation about what that would look like moving forward if that was something that the council felt we wanted to make sure was included as a part of this. We could certainly figure out a way to kind of make that work.
Yeah, and the only why I said that is because, and I'm just being very transparent, is that we have heavy on tenant outreach, right? There's a lot of programs that are going at, which you guys were phenomenal with the buildings. Like I walked with Leah and did a lot of stuff, which need to happen. But also we have all these houses that are being tax delinquent and people have, and there's not anybody heavily on the people that are in there saying, hey, what's really going on? You know, do you know about this? There's actually options, right? We have nothing really in place for that.
So we actually do have, so Caitlin Hubbard, that is largely what she does. So she's the one that's sending the letters, she's doing the one that's doing the phone calls, she's the one that is knocking on the doors.
One person.
Yes.
We have multiple organizations that does tenant support.
So that's why we're saying we're 100% interested in doing it. I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of the fact that we actually do have in place a pretty strong outreach. In fact, we're not aware of other municipalities our size that are doing the level of outreach. Can we expand it? Love to. That would be great. But I just want to make sure that you're aware of the fact that right now we do that pretty intensely. Definitely.
There's just two other things that, or if you had a question.
I wanted to get to Corey's question.
Hey, Corey, get your question out.
Are you sure? I can wait.
Go. It's debate class, let's go.
No, one of my first meetings, sitting here, President was sitting, she's like, just speak up, right? Yeah. Thinking about what Councilors Monto and Jones-Rouser were mentioning, and Michelle, I heard you use the term impact. And when I look at our graphic here, I'm seeing, we talk about evidence of effort and evidence of impact. And to me, this more represents evidence of effort, the number of open cases, how many doors did we knock on, rather than the outcome data that I would like to see. Sure. When we look at the dark blue, the non-compliance, we have 110 contacts. Yep. You mentioned that you make 3 attempts, you knock on the door, you drop off literature. To me, and I sit in a different chair than you all do, I'm not sure that I'm categorizing that as a successful contact. One-way communication is very different from two-way communication. Two-way communication is different from engagement and sustained two-way communication.
Yeah. So in terms of
out
kind
of the
of
110, where do those outcomes go?
Yep. So I think kind of some of the information that is within the packet before you is designed a little bit more just to kind of communicate, here's the volume of things of what they're doing, but we are also looking closely at kind of what is the overall impact. I think what we have seen is there's a definite difference in terms of what, from kind of pre and post surveys, what residents are ranking their level of awareness and willingness to engage with code enforcement on their own in the future. On average, it's raised up from a starting place of about a baseline of 3 to closer to 4 on a scale of 1 to 5.
Who conducts that?
So those are pre and post surveys that the ambassadors are doing at the initial point of case intake and at the point that they're closing the case out. So of surveys that we're getting, we're seeing higher instances of cases with once ambassadors are being involved where they're indicating that they're more willing to call both their landlord themselves at the point that the cases are closing out and also more willing to engage with code enforcement. They're seeing quicker rates of increases in their issues that they initially called to report actually getting addressed. On our end, we're seeing higher instances of actually being able to get into properties than we were for properties where kind of prior to the point of community ambassadors, when we were did not have that resource to do the door knocking or getting into more properties. I think also too what we're seeing in sometimes I think this just speaks to just the nature of doing this work. I think the case management calls with the ambassadors are a big impetus for starting the emergency repair program. I think we are seeing what a lot of people kind of knew to be true for a long time, but it just really underscored the extent to which kind of when we're on twice a week calls of scheduled calls, plus then any number of other back and forths that are happening between the team on a given week or day, when we're seeing the same properties come in again and again and again, and we're seeing the same landlords that are having the same shoddy repairs, really underscores the extent to which we are putting a lot of resources into these. And kind of that was a big reason why we implemented the emergency repair program was we realized we needed a different approach.
Do we end up in a triage situation when we have something like Skyline, right? When you have all those doors to knock, is the one-off house on Danforth Street getting missed because we're focused on 250 doors inside of, I mean, how do you even handle something like that? And that's me being naive to it. Like,
I think we're balancing all of those. So I think in particular through some of the work of the home unit, which is the high occupancy, multi-unit, larger apartment buildings, that's kind of one, as we're doing different sweeps related to that program, we'll leverage the ambassadors in that instance, but we're trying to do a balanced job of kind of pacing what are the cases that we're referring them, what are the cases that they're picking up on of their own outreach, and then just to make sure that we're retaining the bandwidth to be able to address.
so is there
all of
something
these.
that triggers us to go into one of those buildings, or are we proactive enough to say, okay, we're getting ready to open the Skyline again and lease it? Are we going to make contact with all of them before it has a chance to get bad again?
Are you asking about once we go to release the property? I'm not sure I understand the question.
I guess like if we look at a property like that has been closed because of the reason it was closed and is changing hands, do we go in at the beginning of reopening it? Like, is there a plan
Code
to
enforcement
actually?
is absolutely going in to
Right.
inspect the property.
Right. But are we door knocking the people that are going to move in there at the beginning of their tenancy to make sure that everything's good, or do we wait till there's complaints? I'm asking if we're being proactive or reactive.
In terms of those properties that you're mentioning, I don't know that we have a great precedent since we've had this program in place that I can think of where that's been relevant, but
Okay. And I might be asking a bigger, like a dream world for me is that we're making contact before someone's calling and saying that there's rats all over the building, right? I mean,
Well, I think, Commissioner, I think the question is what would have happened if we didn't have the ambassadors and the Skyline closed down?
So,
Well, before you answer,
Oh, yeah.
because you might want to group this question in, because I wanted to ask a question
Okay.
that might go with that. Out of all of the, you said like 1,000 plus residents were engaged. Out of that number, how many of them were a part of these building type units? So if the Skyline has 300 units and another one the Vincent has, 60 units, I don't know. But so how many of them were in those buildings?
so I appreciate the fact that as we got down the line, we got to one that I cannot answer, and so
I don't have those numbers in front of me, but we can get them for you.
But let me make sure I answer both questions here. So to the point of what would happen if we didn't. So Skyline is a great example. Jake Dishaw, Deputy Commissioner at the time he was Director of Codes, and I were regularly in Skyline. It's one thing for us to regularly be in Skyline, but Jan Juba, who's one of the ambassadors, was also regularly in Skyline. And so what that meant was we were getting, while we were taking care of everything that we could find within the common areas, and we were working with every tenant that we could be able to get into, we had somebody else who was not the government that was also doing the same. And so we ended up with a great amount of data and a great amount of interactions that were documented, as Michelle that laid out, that allowed us to stand in front of a judge and allowed us to make sure the Attorney General was aware of what this full picture was. So what would have happened? It probably would have taken longer for us to have resolution. We've got another major complex in town, specifically Parkside Commons, where when Deputy Mayor put together the home unit, which is the high occupancy monitoring and enforcement unit, for us to really focus on the Tim and Troy Green-owned buildings, but the other buildings where we had high levels of police calls that were not just domestic incidents. We had a high level of fire calls, and we had a high level of code enforcement calls. We were able to get the owners of Parkside Commons to come up from New York City because we showed up in force, where the local property manager wanted to tour us through the apartments that she had been able to, make sure look good. And Deputy Mayor's here, great. What the community ambassadors did is they had on the side made sure that people would be home in the apartments that had not been attended to. So we then said to the owners, you're going to go over to this building, and here's who we're going to meet, and we're going to walk inside. And without the community ambassadors, we could not have done that. And it was that interaction that completely changed the owner's willingness to release funds to take care of a lot of the issues that they had. To your point around, so what happens when it comes to Skyline? Can we hit them early? So there's because of the fact that the building has been emptied, they now need a new certificate of compliance. And so to that end, they cannot, and we want to bring these buildings online. You cannot attain a certificate of compliance until every single unit has been inspected on top of all the mechanicals, common areas, and exterior. So Skyline may be at a point where they're able to lease a couple floors. We will make sure, by code, we will make sure that all the common areas, elevator, all that stuff passes inspection, and they cannot lease out anything until those units have also fully passed an inspection. So the building is not in that condition. It's absolutely a safe building before it could be occupied. Would it be great to also then make sure that, if things slide, they have the right people to contact? Absolutely. Because of the fact that a lot of times there's a lag in there, and I think we would want to look at is at time of lease up the right time to make that contact, because if it slides a year later, who of us is like, oh yeah, I know exactly the person to reach out to. So I think that's something that we can explore. Did I, besides totally missing on yours, did I get to what we're talking about? Okay.
Hi, Leah Russell. Thanks so much for taking the time to meet with us today. I just wanted to point out that our outreach strategy is really diversified. And so, yes, we're doing a lot of door knocking and especially taking referrals directly from the city and going out to get their foot in the door when they need us the most. But we're also at community events constantly. Like I think 1/3 of our cases at some data visualizations we just saw today, 1/3 of our cases come to us through word of mouth, right? And so people have a good experience when they work with us and they talk about that, right? So I think that we are reaching some of these folks. I completely appreciate and understand the question about triage. It's like, are we focusing on the problem areas and then ignoring these smaller properties? In the West Side, it's basically all 2 and 3 family houses, right? We don't have these kind of large buildings. So I'm really proud when I look at this image of this map that shows the dots of where our cases take place, because you can see we are on every street in this city.
So I wanted to just go back to something you said in the very beginning. Basically how it all came about after the roundtable talks. And you said you wanted to do something different than what you have than had previously been done as far as inviting people to meetings. So I do know that we support Sharon Sherman's organization, Sally Santangelo's organization through CDBG funding. What's the major difference in what they do for the city versus this organization?
So what I was referring to initially, that was more specific to the outreach and engagement that we were doing. So typically with focus groups, up until that point, we had not done any type of strategy where we were enabling residents to get stipends for their time, where we're effectively surveying them. There's a lot of things that we ask people for their feedback on, and we don't necessarily treat it as though we're doing anything with their time. The challenge that we have with CDBG funding doesn't give us the flexibility to do that. The CJI had a great system in place just from doing it for other different grants that they had of being able to do kind of low dollar amount stipends for participants that were attending and for the hosts that were organizing the event. So we took that $50,000 and kind of rolled it all into that. They had a great system in place for doing that and just managing kind of the documentation and what needs to happen in order to move those dollars and keep track of them the way that you need to. So that was kind of for that particular piece of it. In terms of kind of the scopes of each of those organizations and what we have for under the CDBG contracts, obviously CNY Fair Housing with their fair housing angle and some of the housing discrimination related work that they're doing. That's a particular niche that they have. And so the community ambassadors are making regular referrals in situations where that's relevant to those organizations. There's also some different scopes of work where the Greater Syracuse Tenants Network, some of their building work has historically focused on more kind of convening tenant meetings in some of the larger apartment buildings. And while that's an important scope of work, and I think we're acknowledging that all of these are kind of pieces of the puzzle by evidence of the fact that we're resourcing all of these programs, it is a piece of the puzzle. What we are asking of these guys in terms of the data documentation and reporting is far and above what we are asking for any of the funded agencies through CDBG, just in terms of the breadth and the scope of what they're kind of documenting for us and providing, and just the amount of kind of touch points and agency face-to-face. As I mentioned, we got our whole crew back there that's on the phone twice a week for regularly scheduled calls, plus any number of other ad hoc things that just as cases are coming up where, one of the ambassadors needs to get a hold of the inspector that's on the particular case, or they need to get hold of Ryan, or whatever the case might be. So just in terms of kind of that scope, it's a lot more in depth.
Okay, and,
Sorry, just to add one thing. I really want to commend the city for recognizing the changing demographics within their communities. I have a great relationship with Sharon Sherman, and she's frequently called on us to help out reaching Spanish-speaking clients. Parkside Commons 10 years ago was 10% Spanish-speaking. Today, it's probably over 50% Spanish-speaking. And so she herself recognizes that she struggles to meet that demographic, and we can be the one to make that connection and help her build a relationship, and then she can carry it forward and provide the services. Same thing with Sally. We send a ton of referrals to her.
the program originally identified, I think, 5 key points. One of those points was increase in beautification to residents' homes that was adjacent blighted properties. Where has that taken place?
Yeah, so a couple different ways where we've been looking at that. So since the partnership has been implemented, the land bank has entered into an agreement with CJI to do outreach related to kind of planning, particularly within the west side. This was something that came about as we were looking to do some infill property development work in the neighborhood there. So specifically engaging residents as far as what should the future of some of those land bank properties look like. There's a number of different ways, too, in which the ambassadors are kind of working with Kimon and her team as we're thinking about different property prioritization initiatives. So really helping us make referrals both to the emergency repair program, if there's other instances in which there's vacant properties adjacent. So just really kind of leveraging those relationships. I think the other great example of that is a vacant lot project that we put together over on Tully Street. On a property that's across the street from Westside Academy at Blodgett. So this has been a long vacant lot that's been a huge, for many years, was a huge problem in terms of illegal dumping that was happening there. So there was some fantastic collaboration that happened between the community ambassadors, the youth that are at Blodgett and that are involved with some of the programming at the Peacemaking Center, the youth and basically designed a garden in the area. We did a lot of landscaping improvements, and the youth were really the ones that were driving kind of what that project looked like. We dedicated a memorial tree to Brexie Lee back in the fall. So that's another kind of.
This is particularly beautification to vacant lots, not the residents who live adjacent blighted properties. They're not getting
No, I think
assistance.
that vacant lot was just one example, but also, as I mentioned, kind of some of the partnership with the land bank engagement. Obviously, those are properties, and I think we are very much looking to see what we can do to kind of continue to leverage and build off of the same foundation as we're looking to move forward with the housing strategy implementation and that outreach, and how we're engaging residents and making sure that we're leveraging the ambassadors with that as well.
I would like to see that probably beefed up a little bit more. And I'll just speak to my own issue with a blighted property. I live next door to a blighted property. The backyard had become extremely overgrown, and it crept into my yard and strangled over $500 worth of plants that I had installed. And that is an issue when you live next to a blighted property, or you have trash that's blowing up, people hanging out, things that aren't cut. And granted, there are, I don't know, city people who city contracts who come and cut the grass, but they don't cut brush. They only cut the grass. So the brush continues to grow. So I think that that's something that can be looked at a little bit more as far as that, if that's a part of the scope. And I don't think that that has been done to the point where, as much as you've been doing outreach. Some of the beautification could could help as far as the trust portion of some of those people, individuals trusting, some of the city and having a better relationship.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I can appreciate that feedback, and I think, as I mentioned, that's something that we're looking to do the last couple of years. We've been really focused on kind of establishing the foundation for the program, building the program, and it's something that we're looking to continue to be intentional about scaling as we're looking to move forward with the housing strategy implementation.
As we move forward, I'm gonna be very transparent. I love what they do. Like I said, I walk door to door. I've been in places where the ambassadors have done phenomenal work. Like I said, with Leah and the crew. But only thing I'm gonna be I have to say this is, Patrona made something very clear today about Sally's, Sharon Sherman. We got Volunteer Law Project. We have a plethora of organizations that support the community far as rental registry. But when it comes to homeowners and these houses being taken, we don't. So if we could figure out a way that they can be a voice and help, it would really, really, I think help the taxpayers see that there's a leverage. Because right now there's not a leverage. There's more heavier on one side than the other. And I think they would be very, very instrumental with helping support some of these families, either getting their taxes paid or moving out without so many issues,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
that part.
So, any other questions? Because we got another meeting coming up. I want to close out here.
I just wanted to speak to that too. This is one of the reasons why we're so excited to have this conversation so that we can brainstorm what the next evolution of the program is. One of the comments earlier in terms of like the budget and funding, one of the things I'd point out is that we want to be able to cross-fund programs as much as possible so that this doesn't just land on the city. And we've done that in terms of a lot of foundation funding. So we've got funding from the Community Foundation around lead health. And so that's also helping to support not just the stipends, but the kitchen table talks, but the outreach and some of the salaries so that we are able to do that. So that may also be something that we can now take back to our development team and look at what other funding sources may we be able to add into the city's funding so that we can expand the program, both in terms of the owner-occupied taxes as well as the beautification projects and being able to help folks with that.
Let me just question you on the lead
Of course.
aspect. So what is your team doing if you have a property that you go to talk to a tenant and identify that there's a lead issue? Are you then working with the homeowner to get into whatever lead programs are available as far as windows, doors, siding? Is that something that's happened? And how many of those cases have happened? So that's a follow-up, per se.
Absolutely. I don't have
she
that
can speak
data
to
at my
it
fingertips,
now.
but Jan
Yeah.
Juba, as one of our lead lead health ambassadors, can certainly answer.
Hello, my name is Jen Juba. I'm also the lead advocate and Northside Community Ambassador. So I took on the lead program about last year around September. And if I go into a house, let's say for rental registry, and I notice there's a child that's like maybe 5, 6 years old, I will ask the parents, like, hey, have you got your child tested for lead? And then I'll also give them the template for the lead. If they haven't got this child tested for lead, because lead is also considered HIPAA protected, I'll ask them if it's okay for me to schedule an appointment with them, with the health department. So I have a point of contact at the health department. I'll usually call them and let them know there's a family. There might be a sign of lead, and then I'll educate the family, like if there's a crack, the paint is falling down, we'll get that tested, and I'll encourage them to go ahead and ask their doctor to test the child for lead. And if it's the child found tested positive for lead, the health department will come in and do the testing at the house, and then they'll have the point, and then they'll let the landlord know to go ahead and fix it up by a certified lead person who can come and paint it out. So.
And we have agreements in place with the health department so that any case that is coming to the health department for kind of the type of outreach that Jan Juba is mentioning then gets referred directly to our office to kind of close the loop on any code violations that are with it, but also to connect them with the resources from the grant program. So in terms of kind of the resources to actually get the work corrected. So,
Okay,
yes.
yeah, the resources is my main
Yes,
question.
yeah, absolutely.
Are
Yes.
we connecting people
Yes.
with the resources?
Yeah, they
Yes.
are connected with the resource, and also the landlord is connected to resources. If the landlord is unable to afford to get somebody certified to paint it, the health department have a program that they can apply on behalf of the tenant. So I'll stay with that case until the house is retested and the lead problem is resolved before I can close that case out.
And thank you, I commend you for the work that you do with the, getting those children to get tested. Okay, so I'm just gonna,
I would just like to say a few things. You know, Leah's worked on the near west side. In fact, just before this meeting started, she told me about a issue over in one of the streets I represent. I appreciate we contact each other. I just think in a city that's, you know, in dire housing needs, where we have a lot of rental property, especially on the near west side, where school kids sometimes move 2 or 3 times a year, we've always needed, all the years I've worked for the city, we've needed a program like this, community ambassador program, because these folks, you know, they run into, this is who the people from the city, they run into a police officer, a parks worker, a school teacher, or sometimes a codes person. Nobody to advocate literally on their street sometimes. And you've done a great job in advocacy for the people on the near west side, and I really appreciate it. One question, you know, this just occurred to me, and I'm going to direct it to Mike. Can you get into a tax trust if you don't have rental registry?
That's an excellent question.
A city councilor loves hearing that. When you ask a question, somebody says that.
And you offer many.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% certain, so I
Because
will
about
find out.
50%, I guess we're at 50% as far as rental registry goes.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
figure,
roughly.
you know,
Yep.
and that's something I know. And to Councilor Caldwell's point, and of course, Councilor Jones-Rouser, I think maybe if we expanded it to let people know as the homeowners, this would probably be simple for Camone to put together. I put it on Camone, is the people that are, like on the start with the near west side.
I
Yeah.
managed to
I mean,
move
people that are in arrears and getting they might have their family, you know, single-family houses, they might be in jeopardy of losing their house. I think Leah's people could probably contact them personally, you know.
Yeah,
Just
so-
expand the scope of this, but most of, in near west side, like a lot of parts of the city is, you know, mostly rental properties, so.
Totally. So
I mean,
we're
we're
looking
talking
at
about
it.
expanding the scope, but we want to make sure that we can also sustain this program. Because once ARPA is gone, where's the money coming from? So that's going to be a
That'll
big,
be priorities by this administration and the next administration.
Yeah.
Certainly filling that gap in advocacy with the citizens that sometimes don't meet people on a regular basis, you know, from the city. I think this is a really important program.
And it doesn't
Appreciate that.
intimidate people. When you say the city, like when I knocked down the door, it was like, hey, I'm coming on a whole different level. It was a different relationship, right? So regardless that I'm a counselor, I came to them as like, no, I get it. Let's talk. How can I help you? When you think of city and you think of government, you automatically get on the defense, especially when people are behind or in a crisis. Even if you're saying the greatest thing, you could say, today is great. People are like, you know what I mean? Especially when they're in crisis mode. So having that in-between person, it just works, that buffer, you know, helping out people.
right. So, again, thank you, Michelle, thank you, Leah, to your staff. Follow-ups are the overall impact that Corey talked about.
What you talked about was great. I want to see more of that.
Yep, you got it.
The push for beautification, not just on private or lots, vacant lots, with the possibility, and I'm just going to put this out there, with the possibility of partnering with the Cornell Master Gardeners for that, and support of the tax foreclosures. So that's just follow-up information. And I might have a few more questions on, not today, not right now, anyway, because we didn't get to speak about some of the funding allocations per individual. So I'll reach out for information on that. All right, so if we don't have any more questions, I will call this meeting to motion to adjourn.
Thank you all so much for your time. Thank you. Excellent questions and ideas.